Matty Fresh on the track up estate. And I'm bringing to you live my boys Alec and Nate. Tequila Ty, Jay, Nelly, and Zillin in the building. So kick it back, pour the drink. We chillin' because I'm boozing and betting and ballin' like I'm 2-6. In the blue kicks, watch me move quick. Yeah, this the blueprint. So who's getting involved? Welcome into the show. This is Booze, Bets, and Ball, baby.
And welcome back in. It has been a while since we got to do an episode. Just going to do a little solo one today. It's been hard to get a hold of everyone. Can you believe Nelly has a job? So it's been a little difficult to get everyone on the same page. Obviously, that will change closer to the season. We'll get back into stuff. But with it being now past Memorial Day, transfer portal completely closed, spring camp over with, coach movement done, and pretty much everyone who enrollment done too. There was one surprise on that, which we'll get into, but I thought it was the perfect time to look at more or less the finished product of Penn State's roster and coaching staff for the 2025 season. Also got some schedule announcements that came out this past week. So we're going to get into all that right now. All right. And we are going to start with everyone's favorite topic, always the transfer portal. When we had Landon on, I guess that was late January, early February, somewhere in there. The majority of this transfer haul was complete, but the two guys you see at the top there were the new additions, and they were at the two positions that when we asked Landon what he thought they still need to add at receiver and linebacker, and they went out and they got two guys highly ranked in terms of, transfer portal rankings, both with that 4-star 91 grade. Transfer portal rankings are a little weird. Guys that, because there's a lot of factors that go into it. Guys that have multiple years of eligibility left sometimes are going to be ranked higher just based off of that because they're not, quote unquote rentals. So there's a little more that goes into that. But two big additions for Penn State here. So 3 receivers overall come in for Penn State. Trebor Pena, which his name is Robert backwards, and that's on purpose. I don't know the reasoning behind it, but that's it. King Mac obviously returns. Owen Wafel, who has a 5-star recruit brother in the 2026 class, also coming in as, they have him listed as an edge. Pretty sure he's going to be on the DT there. Devontae Ross, we talked about a lot. And then they got those 2 A&M guys. Nye White comes back home, and TJ Shanahan also there. And then Kyron Hudson rounds out the list. Had a touchdown against Penn State when he was on USC this past year. Pena and Ross get the majority of the attention, and I get it. Ross 84, or not Ross, Pena 84 catches, 941 yards, 9 TDs. Ross had over 1,000 yards for Troy this past year. So I see why the two of them get the majority of the hype, but Hudson, solid player. I think he'll be a pretty good security blanket for Drew Aller. I just think he's the sure-handed guy. These other two guys, a little more explosiveness to their game, smaller guys. But this finally with Hudson feels like Penn State has a big body at receiver, which have they really had that since, if you want to consider Jawan Johnson, it's the last one really that I could think of that was a legitimate threat for them. So good to get him back, get him in there. So also, obviously, guys are going to transfer out. Penn State had to do a lot of shuffling. A couple surprises, I'd say, since we did last speak, and that would be Tamir Robinson, who was kind of slated to be the 2-mic this year, transfers to USC. There was some talk that maybe he didn't fit Jim Knowles' system as well, and he wanted to go somewhere where maybe the system was better for him and he could see more playing time. Ends up at USC, obviously not known for their defense lately, but he heads there. James Franklin actually kind of said out loud that was a shock after the spring game back in April. So, without mentioning his name, but that was a surprise. John Mitchell, a highly regarded guy out of high school. Seems like it was a homesick situation. He's from the South, ends up at Georgia Tech. These two right here are a little surprising. So JB Nelson and Smith Filbert were both slated to come back the last time we did an episode. And after after spring camp, they both left. That does happen. They kind of see where they are in the pecking order, not as high as they want it to be. In the case of JB Nelson, I think that's a really great sign on Cooper Cousins, though, that in his second year on campus, he's looking like a legit starter. So I'm excited to see what he does. Smith Filbert hurts a little. We're going to get into the roster, but, the edge position isn't great. They definitely needed a guy like this that had some experience, an older guy. It's pretty much denied Dennis Sutton and then a mixture of some older guys coming off injuries and some younger guys that haven't seen the field a lot. So not exactly sure how that's going to look at the beginning of the season, but for the time being, that's what they're going with. So finally, I did want to touch right back on Amari Campbell again. So a guy that a lot of people were surprised left UNC and Bill Belichick, but Penn State sure is glad he did in the wake of what happened with Tamir Robinson, one of the more productive players on UNC's defense last year as a sophomore, 76 total tackles, 6.5 sacks, 11 TFLs. I don't know if he'll put up those type of numbers here, especially because I don't think he'll be a full-time starter. It still seems like Rojas and DeLuca are going to start linebacker for Penn State, and Campbell will rotate in. If he's a depth guy, though, that's a win. With just the production he had at the Power 4 level, it's hard to see him replicating those numbers. And obviously, at 6 feet, he's not moving to edge. I think those sack numbers are a little deceiving. People think, oh well, Carter did it, so why can't he? Yeah, Carter was 6'3.5", 6'4", over 260 at the end there. Totally different player. Just because there's sack numbers doesn't mean they can play edge. So he's definitely sticking at linebacker. He's not going to help that edge room at all. So good depth piece, I think, could eventually crack the starting lineup. I think Rojas will be a lot better coming back from the shoulder injury he had, pretty much during the entire second half and playoff run of the season. And DeLuca's back, and I think they like what DeLuca does. So maybe Campbell eventually overtakes DeLuca, but I'd have a hard time seeing that off the bat. All right, and let's talk about that roster. So our lads usually does a really good job updating, but they do not have Campbell and Pena on here, which I'm a little surprised about. Honestly, it's been almost 2 months now. I thought they'd maybe have that out, but did not. So we got Hudson and Ross starting here, and then Pena should slide into the slot here, push Denmark back to the second team. If I had to guess, the second team, I don't think Anthony Ivy is going to be on that too deep at the receiver position. Denmark, Clifford, and then honestly keep an eye out for Kobe Howard and Lyric Samuel. They got a lot of high praise during the winter and into the spring. So, we'll see what goes on there. But Penn State, for the most part, is going to be relying on those 3 transfers to carry them at the receiver position this year. And with how much of an all-in season this is, that's okay. There's going to be time next year. I'd honestly be surprised if Penn State brought in a transfer receiver for 2026, unless it was an absolute stud with, even if it was just for 1 year. I would have to be a top of the line guy. I feel like there are starting to collect a lot of talent in there. Peter Gonzalez is coming back from injury. Obviously, Denmark has flashed, and they really like him. And then Auden, Samuel, and Howard, those 3 freshmen you see with the 4 team here. There's a lot of hype around them. And then the 2026 class, I know, look, no one's signed yet, so I'm not going to get into it, but they do have some solid receiver recruits in that class too. So, we'll see. But for this season, the one we're focusing on, those 3 transfers are going to carry the weight at the receiver position. And, that's what they want to happen, I would say. So no complaints there, but it does help that you got all this young talent kind of growing behind these guys where you could bring in, 3 transfers all on, expiring, they're all 1-year rentals. So it's just kind of nice that they could learn from these guys. And then these guys are out of their hair for next season. And these guys can grow into those starting roles, which is nice. We've talked about the offensive line a lot, even without JB Nelson. This group is good. Shelton, Ione, Dawkins, Cousins in there at right guard, as I mentioned. And then, so the interesting thing is what goes on at right tackle. Rucci played awesome in the playoff run with Donko out. But if you ask anyone who knows anything, which I include, obviously Landon helps us out with that when it comes to offensive line, Donko might be the best offensive lineman in this group and probably has the best pro potential of this group. So, I don't know what they do because you love those 3 guys on the interior. I don't think you want to take any of them out of the starting lineup. But can you move Donko to guard to get both those guys on the field? Yeah. It's interesting. Donko did not take part in winter or spring activities, still recovering from what seems to be a ACL injury. So, those take some time, especially, he's a bigger guy. He's 6'6", 330, I think. So not going to be too easy to come back from right away. But, they're still hopeful on him. But I think it's nice that you have Nolan Rucci back for another year. And if he plays at the level that he played at in the playoff run, then, you're not really missing much, even though you want Donko out there because he is by far one of your best 5 linemen, but who are you taking off? Phil Troutman's got an interesting dilemma. It's a good dilemma. It's, oh my gosh. So for 10 years under James Franklin, they couldn't field an offensive line, and now we're complaining that they can't play NFL caliber linemen. So we'll take this over what it was. So no complaints with that. But yeah, just some interesting storylines to keep an eye on there as summer camp gets going in late July, August. So over to tight end then. So they have Luke Reynolds starting here. I think that Dinkins will always be announced as the starter. They do like the starting lineup on the Jumbotron before the game. I think it'll be Dinkins. Reynolds will probably get the most looks in the passing game. And then keep an eye on Rapley. Rapley is kind of forgotten about. So there was a lot of hype around him going into last season to being tight end 2 behind Warren. And then sometime in practice between the West Virginia and Bowling Green games, he tears his ACL and he's out for the year. And, Warren pretty much carried the load. You didn't see much of these other guys. I know Reynolds flashed, had some crazy catches that people got excited about. But Rapley is a legit prospect as well for this team. Was a top 100 recruit, was committed to Michigan at one point, which is also a big tight end school. So, there's a lot to like with him too. I kind of think he's under the radar. They do not have the true freshman Andrew Olish on here either. I think he is going to factor into the passing game a little bit. Skinnier guy right now, definitely needs to add some weight to play the tight end position. But if stuff isn't going too well with the receiving group, you could kind of see him get out on the field and maybe they put him in the slot to create some mismatches or stuff like that. So something else to keep an eye on. Quarterback, we know it's Drew Aller. The question is behind him, Gronkmeyer or Smolik. Neither right now is Pabula. I don't think you'll get a Pabula package from either of these guys either. Gronkmeyer has the higher ceiling for sure. They love the arm. Neither of them are the athlete and the Swiss Army knife that Bo Pabula was. So I don't think there's any package there. I'm a little more concerned with if something was to happen to Drew this year, how it would go. Obviously, we know Bo had a step in that Wisconsin game and played almost perfect to help Penn State win that game, which, helped them get as far as they did this past season. So, that is something that concerns me a little bit. I think they're going to protect Aller more this year because of that. Obviously, the offensive line is better, which helps. And they can rely on the running backs because both Nick Singleton and Katron Allen are back, which was unthinkable, honestly, even midway through the playoff run. So just crazy to get both those guys back. Really helps this team this season because it does take a lot of the pressure off Aller, that he could rely on these two guys who they both played awesome down the stretch. When the offensive line started being cohesive, these guys got going. That's obviously goes hand in hand. So great to get both them back. And then honestly, it's also nice they did not lose any of the backup running backs to the portal, which is crazy. Even with Juwan Sider leaving to go to Notre Dame, none of them left, which I think says a lot about them as wanting to be at Penn State, but also helps because we know Singleton and Allen are gone after this year. So having these guys in this room, and they will be experienced, because I think there will be times where, like with Aller, Penn State's going to protect Singleton and Allen. They're going to be taken out of games maybe a little sooner than they were past years because, Penn State, look, you're just trying to get to that 10-11 win threshold and get in the playoffs, and whatever happens, happens. I mean, we know like the 4 teams that made up the Final Four this past year were all teams that had home games. They didn't have the bye. They all had to play. And, Ohio State won the Natty without getting that bye. So, you just get in and whatever happens can happen. So I think they are going to protect those guys a little more heading into the playoff run on defense. So this does not have Wafel or Campbell on it, which is a little surprising. I would say that Campbell probably takes the spot that Anthony Specca currently has on that 2 deep. In terms of the defensive line, Durant is obviously starting, but the other DT, Xavier Gilliam actually has a chance to win that spot, as Alonzo Ford is also coming back from injury. I think those are your top 3. Ford, Durant, Gilliam to start. We'll see if Wafel can get in there, if Caleb Bartis can get in there, Ty Blanding, all these guys. But I'm pretty confident those are your 3 you're looking at to start. At the edge position, Anai White is a great wild card here. So he has 2 years of eligibility remaining. I think Penn State is looking at him more to help them next year when you lose DDS as well. But the ceiling is there where if enough clicks, he could be a starter this season. And if it clicks, Penn State has a former 5-star playing at his ceiling. This defense just goes to an entirely new level all over again. So, wild card, but not counting on it. We know what DDS is. We'll see how he does without Carter on the other side. I am interested to see that. I think a lot of people are. I do think it's fair that Zariah Fisher is listed there. I think he will get the first crack to be the starter opposite DDS, but Max Granville, look, they kind of give him the next Carter hype. Obviously the guy that reclassified and came in a year early, so he had that redshirt year under his belt, and I think they're looking at him like, it's go time this year. So we'll see there with him. Jalen Harvey, kind of same deal. Played a little bit last year, got hurt a little bit, banged up. Did some nice things when he was on the field. So something to keep an eye on. The cornerback room, there's not much to say because it's really good. Harris, Collins, Washington, Zion Tracy, all back. It's a good group. There's really nothing to say about that. That's a good group. Those guys are going to do a lot of good things this year. And obviously when you're playing Oregon and Ohio State and the receivers they have, you need good corners. So glad that they got to keep that group together for the most part. I know they lost John Mitchell, but kept pretty much everyone on the 2 deep together, which is nice. Safety's an interesting one. John Lane will probably slide next to Zakee Wheatley. Wheatley is obviously a lock to start. Will King Mack eventually overtake him? We'll see. I think you're going to see King Mack in the nickel too. He'll get in there as well with Tracy. So I think they're going to use Mack a little bit as a Swiss Army knife, kind of like they were with Reed before the Winston injury changed everything with the safety group last year. But I think that's kind of the plan there. But not a deep group, which is a little concerning. You like that top 3 of Lane, Wheatley, and Mack, but one of them goes down. They don't have the same depth they kind of had last year at the position. So kind of looking to see if someone could step up there into the 2 deep and be flash for the future, because you do lose Wheatley after this year, but somebody to keep an eye on there. Special teams, they got all the specialists back, which may not mean much, but it's nice to have some consistency there, because there's been times under James Franklin where special teams has been a head scratcher, but got Riley Thompson back for another year, Ryan Barker back after an impressive kicking stretch, starting in pretty much the USC game. I know he played the week before, but it was pretty much the USC game and on where he caught fire. What they do at kick returner, maybe it'll be Singleton. Are they going to protect him? I don't know. Punt returner, they do not have Devontae Ross or Trebor Pena listed here. I think there's a pretty good chance that one of them is the punt returner. They both have done it. If Penn State wants some kind of game-changing aspect with that, in that aspect of the game, they will go to one of those guys. It may not be consistently to protect them, but in big spots, you could see those guys returning kicks or punts and possibly kicks as well. So that is something to keep an eye on with the overall depth chart of the team. We're going to talk about the coaching staff, obviously. Nothing has changed since the last time we were together, but it's, again, something you got to bring up, the fact that they kept so much of this coaching staff together after a long playoff run like that. They fought off some schools who were given to Andy Kotelnicki looks as a head coach. Honestly, kind of helped them that the schools that wanted him were trying to do their coaching search while Penn State was in the middle of the playoff run, and he just said, no, I'm not doing this right now. I want to be with the team for the playoff run. And then mostly West Virginia was like, well, we want to coach in here ASAP. So went a different direction, worked out. That is something that will be worth monitoring next season. I think he will stay with the team throughout their hopeful playoff run, regardless of if he has a head coaching job or not. But, it is maybe an added distraction, some sorts of just something to monitor. But obviously that is a little thing in the grand scheme of things for this season. Bring in Jim Knowles from Ohio State, regardless of what Ohio State fans want to say. It's a big addition. I know people love to say, oh, defense wasn't the problem. They're making sure it doesn't become one. I don't know how many times I could say that. Just because Manny Diaz was good and Tom Allen was whatever, I wasn't the biggest fan. And Penn State is traditionally known for good defense. Investing that much in a defensive coordinator is fine, because you don't want it to become a problem. And if you can even get it to a higher level, do it. And maybe they can with Jim Knowles. I know the talent is a little down. I think last year's defense was definitely more talented at full strength. So if you had KJ Winston in there the whole season, with Carter, with Izzard and Ellis in the DT mix, with Rojas at 100% healthy, I think it goes a little differently. Obviously, that group was stacked. I don't know right now that this group matches that one. So bringing in a better defense coordinator works out. Why not? I think it's better to do it than to not. So no matter what anyone is saying, Penn State's spending on Jim Knowles is a good thing. And then obviously Stan Drayden comes in to replace John Sider as running backs coach. At worst, I think you're pushing. It's a push. Sider, probably a better recruiter. I think Drayden, though, has the better track record of developing talent. I know Sider would have gotten a lot of credit for Journey Brown had he not had to retire, just because of how lowly recruited he was and ranked. And, he sat behind Sanders for a year. And then 2019, burst on the scene towards the end there. He could have had a guy there, obviously a guy who I think would have been a fairly highly drafted running back, but you won't get a running back drafted until Singleton and Allen get drafted following this season. So I think Drayden's the better developer. I think it's a push. And, with the recruiting aspect of Penn State and running backs, it's recruiting itself at this point. I don't think you need a crazy recruiter for Penn State. I mean, they got Messiah Mickens committed right now, who's a top 200 recruit, I think. And then in the 2027 class, they have Keemon Spell, who's a 5-star. Now, both those guys are from PA. That helps, obviously. But I just don't think you need to be too worried about having a recruiter-first coach at running back at Penn State anymore. And, I can say the same about tight end. I think Ty Haldo is a good recruiter. But, it's just at the point where it's not something you need to worry about. The position is going to recruit itself at Penn State. Now, there's enough name recognition and enough background, especially with Saquon Barkley just having the season he had in the NFL, that you could just tell, if James Franklin could just tell every running back, I think you could be the next Saquon Barkley. And it's usually enough of a selling point. So it's not something you have to worry about with a recruiter. But everyone else is back. Phil Trotwine, like if he does go somewhere, I think it'll be the NFL at this point. So it's kind of just coming down to if someone takes him to go to the NFL, one of the NFL teams wants him. Otherwise, I think he's your offensive line coach for a fairly long time still. And he's doing a hell of a job right now. And he is a great combination of developer and recruiter. Penn State's recruiting at a level on the offensive line they never have. They're also getting the most out of guys right now, which is great to see. So getting him back is huge. Everyone else is pretty much the same. I know Dan Connor does take on a more official role, I guess is the best way to put it. He was pretty much the linebackers coach last year, but it's, the name's there now. It's next to it. So Dan Connor being there is awesome. There's a lot of Letterman on the coaching staff, which is cool, with him, Hal, Smith. So, it is nice to have some of that there, just guys that when they go into the living room for a recruit, they can relate to those guys about their experiences at Penn State. So that helps. But overall, just having that cohesion with a coaching staff is as big as a roster, especially when in college you deal with a lot of roster turnover from year to year. Keeping coaching staff together is a huge added plus. And Penn State was able to do that. And the one change is obviously at running back, and it's the one position where if you were changing coaches, that's fine, because your two guys in Singleton and Allen are, more or less finished products in terms of their college game. Obviously, when they go to the NFL, there might be an added level, but, you're not trying to develop them or anything. You're just letting them do their game. So if there was a time to make a change, not that Penn State, made the change, but if there was a time for this to happen with Juwan Sider, and honestly, it was the perfect year because it lets Singleton and Allen ride out this year as the starters. They're done. You don't got to worry about doing anything, keep them happy for the following season. They're out of eligibility, and you don't have to really worry about developing them too much further. They're seniors. But it allows Drayden to work with those younger guys, get them under his techniques, and then let him recruit his guys. And Mickens and Spell were both committed before. I know Mickens was. I think Spell was too. Committed before the change happened. They stayed. So I think if there was time for it to happen, though, it was the best case scenario. Obviously, losing Juwan Sider does suck, but it could have been worse, I think, in terms of timing. Okay, and the final thing we're going to talk about is kick time. So the first 4 games of the upcoming season have been announced in terms of kick times, TV affiliation, stuff like that. So the season will open against Nevada on August 30th at 3:30 on CBS, which is cool. And then FIU at noon on Big Ten Network. Yeah, they had to get a sleeper in there. We all know that. And then the following week, Villanova at 3:30 on FS1. And then Penn State has a bye week in there. So I'm pretty sure when the season starts in August, there's 2 built-in bye weeks. Even if it's August 30th, 31st, whatever, as long as it's in August, you get 2 bye weeks, is my understanding. And then off the bye, the Oregon game, 7:30, NBC, already announced as the whiteout. This is awesome that Penn State finally, again, gets to have their marquee home game as the whiteout. I think Iowa in 23 was a good was that 20? Yeah, in 23 was a good choice. just because of everything that had gone on the last time those two teams played, kind of that revenge aspect. I don't think anyone really hated that. 2022, it being Minnesota when Ohio State was coming into town the next week, I think was annoying as hell. And then this past season, once again, Ohio State comes into town. It's at noon. And then the following week, you flatten Washington on Peacock for the whiteout as the night game. Yeah, not great. So it is nice that got to do this again. It's been a few years. Auburn too, I would say that was a good choice in 21, but I think, perfect world, they would have preferred that Michigan game, but it was in November, and at that time you couldn't have November night games in the Big Ten. So yeah, Auburn was the obvious choice that year. And then all the years before that, before this big noon crap took over, 19, it was Michigan, good choice. 18, Ohio State. 17, Michigan. 16, as we know, Ohio State. 15 was when they did the day whiteout against Michigan. That game was so boring. And then 14 was the double overtime Ohio State night whiteout. So to get back to that is cool. Oregon is the top team that Penn State will play at home this season. So it is just nice to finally get back to that where the whiteout kind of gets its importance back. And man, that's going to be a fun one. So Oregon should be highly rated going into the season. And I did not look at who their first three opponents are, but I have to venture to guess they'll be 3-0 heading into this game. I don't know if they have a bye either. So 3-4 now. But this is going to be Dante Moore, their new quarterback. It's going to be his first big test. I'm pretty sure this is his first road Big Ten game, and it's the whiteout against what should be a top 5 Penn State team. So there's a lot of hype around him. I want to see if he can live up to it. Obviously, in this situation, it's gonna be interesting. So this actually is not their first road Big Ten game that season. They go to Northwestern on September 13th. Okay, yeah, they play at the glorified soccer field, so that doesn't even count. So this is his first big road Big Ten test, to say the least. So we'll see how he does, but I know the crowd's going to want to get to him, and it should be a fun game. Oregon fans, it's just really, obviously there was the Big Ten championship game, but it's going to be their first time coming here. So that'll be cool. We'll kind of see what they have to say about it, because they love their atmosphere out there in Eugene. So there'll probably be a ton of them coming out, and their highlighter colors on the whiteout, they'll stick out like sore thumbs. So that'll be something to also keep an eye out for. But I wanted to get that in there as well. So we'll be back at some point over the summer to talk about things as camp gets closer. But I want to give an update on everything that's happened. And hopefully we'll have everyone back together next time we do an episode. So we'll see you then.